Yesterday we began learning about decimals in terms of tenths and hundredths. In our notebooks yesterday we made a place value chart similar to the one below, which had ones on the left, the decimal is right here, and then to the right we had tenths and then hundredths. And yesterday we also looked at this in terms of base 10 blocks. We had our square here, which represented 1, and each one of those has 100 of the hundredths cubes, which is why we call the little individual ones a hundredth when we're talking about fractions, and the big one like this, 1, because it takes 100 of these little guys to make one whole. Okay, this one, what we normally call the 10th rod, takes up 10 of the hundredths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10 hundredths, which make up a tenth, and 100 hundredths, which make up one whole. Just a quick review from yesterday. So that meant when we were representing things like 0 and 6, as we would read this, that would be 6 tenths. So what that would mean is that we would actually have 6 of these tenth rods, which is the same thing as 60 hundredths. But the way that we represent it in decimal form changes the way we represent it as a fraction. So the way that we have this written now, it represents 6 tenths. So that means we would write 6 over 10 as a fraction. The next example I'm going to give you, we would write perhaps 3 tenths. So again, because we're writing out of 10 and there's nothing in our hundredths column here, we're going to write it as a fraction just as we see it. It's 3 tenths, that means it's 3 out of 10. Now yesterday we talked about how that was equivalent as well to something in the hundredths. So I could also write 0.30. Okay? So these two fractions that we have here, or decimals, are equivalent, but they're represented differently as a fraction. So for the one that we've just written, sorry, I don't know why the page flipped there. For the one we've just written, 0.30, this number we read as a whole. We read it as 30 instead of recording it as 3, and then we're dealing in the hundredths here. So we write it as 30 out of 100. And that's how we record that type of decimal as a fraction. So this looks pretty simple when we're dealing with numbers like this, but I could also write 0.17. Okay? As a fraction, because we have something in the tenths and the hundredths, we read this number as a whole, and that reads as 17 over, we know we're in the hundredths column, so we're going to read it as 17 over 100. And finally, we could have an example that looks like this, 0.09. And what that means is that we actually don't have any tenths, but we have 9 hundredths. So we write it as a fraction just like we say it. 9 hundredths is 9 out of 100. Now, sometimes we'll have a number that looks like this, 160. Now, because we have a digit in the ones column, that tells us we have one whole. So we would write this as a mixed number in a fraction, and we would write our wholes big. So we would have 1 to represent our one whole, and then this we represent the same way we did on the last page. It's 60 hundredths, so we would represent 60 over 100. So that's how you would represent a mixed number. Let's try another one. Let's do 4 and 30. So in our ones column, we have a 4. That means we have 4 wholes. And then we read this fraction as 30 out of 100. So we would represent it as 30 out of 100. Now we could get really tricky, and I could give you something like this, in which case you still look at your ones. We have 2 ones. So we have 2 wholes. We have 0 tenths, but we have 4 hundredths. So in that case, we would represent it like this, 2 and 4 hundredths, or 2 and 4 over 100. Okay, so I'm going to give you another one here, and I want you to think about how it would look as a fraction before I write it down for you. So we're going to do 325, 3.25. So take a minute, think about what that would look like, pause the video, and then see if you're correct. Awesome, so hopefully you looked at your ones first, and you realized you had 3 whole ones, and then you looked at this together, which is 25, and it's out of 100, so you wrote your fraction as 3 and 25 hundredths. I think you're ready to try the work for today. If you're not, go back and watch this video again, or the part of this video again that you think would help you, and then you can go on to do the exploring tenths work that the teacher will give you. Good luck!